Today I want to share with you the story of Maya Chen, a woman whose life seemed perfectly arranged like the meticulous spreadsheets she created for her corporate clients. A woman who believed that control and planning were the foundations of happiness. A woman who would learn, in one shocking moment, that sometimes the most beautiful parts of life emerge from the chaos we never planned for. Before we dive into Maya's story, I want you to imagine coming home, exhausted from travel, looking forward to the comfort of familiar surroundings, only to discover something so unexpected that it forces you to question everything you thought you knew. But what would you do? How would you react? Would you run away, or would you stay and face the truth, no matter how painful? Maya's journey isn't just about a surprising discovery, it's about finding the courage to embrace uncertainty, to recognize that sometimes the unexpected doesn't destroy us, but instead reveals who we truly are and what really matters in our lives. Music swells briefly. Maya never planned to return early from her business trip to Singapore. She never intended to walk into her home unannounced on that rainy Tuesday evening. She had no idea that the simple act of opening her front door would become the dividing line between her old life and whatever waited beyond. But as the saying goes, life is what happens when you're busy making other plans. So let me take you back to where it all began, 3 weeks before that fateful evening, when Maya's world still made perfect sense to her. Before she learned that sometimes the most profound moments of growth come from our most painful surprises. Maya Chen had always been exceptional at everything she set her mind to. The daughter of Chinese immigrants who settled in Boston, she had grown up watching her parents work tirelessly at their small restaurant, sacrificing everything to give her opportunities they never had. Their dedication had instilled in her a fierce work ethic and an unshakable belief that with enough planning and effort, any obstacle could be overcome. By 35, Maya had become one of the youngest senior consultants at Barton Global Strategy, a prestigious firm where she specialized in helping struggling companies reinvent themselves. Her colleagues often joked that Maya could fix anything except the broken coffee machine on the 3rd floor. Her reputation for turning chaos into order had earned her the nickname the architect around the office. Maya doesn't just build solutions, her boss would tell clients, she designs entire new realities. She lived in a meticulously decorated brownstone in Cambridge, which she had purchased after her promotion 3 years ago. Every item in her home had been thoughtfully selected, from the mid-century modern furniture to the carefully curated collection of contemporary art that reflected her refined taste. Like everything else in her life, her home was an expression of her precision and control. Maya's marriage to David, a professor of literature at Boston University, had followed the same careful planning. They had met at a charity auction 6 years ago, dated for exactly 18 months, and married in a ceremony that wedding blogs had featured for its elegant efficiency. David was her perfect complement, thoughtful and creative where she was practical and analytical. He brought spontaneity to her structured world, often surprising her with impromptu weekend getaways or midnight picnics under the stars when she worked late. "You plan enough for both of us," he would tell her with that crooked smile that still made her heart flutter after all these years. "Let me be the one who helps you forget the plan sometimes." Their friends saw them as the ideal couple, successful, attractive, and genuinely happy together, despite their different approaches to life. Maya had even started to consider the possibility of children, creating spreadsheets analyzing the optimal time to start a family given their careers and financial goals. At work, Maya's latest project involved salvaging a family-owned retail chain on the verge of bankruptcy. The assignment had consumed her for months, requiring all her skill and focus. When the opportunity came to present her strategy to potential investors in Singapore, Maya didn't hesitate, even though it meant 3 weeks away from home. "It'll be good for us," David had said as he helped her pack. "Absence makes the heart grow fonder and all that. Plus, I've got midterms to grade and that conference paper to finish. The time will fly by." Maya had kissed him goodbye at the door, her mind already racing ahead to her presentation, the meetings she'd scheduled, the outcomes she anticipated. Never once did she imagine that this routine business trip would become the catalyst for the most unplanned, uncontrolled, and unexpected turning point of her life. Music fades to a subtle travel soundtrack, airport announcements, distant conversations. Singapore welcomed Maya with its familiar blend of humidity and efficiency. From the moment she landed at Changi Airport, she fell into her work rhythm, barely noticing the stunning architecture or vibrant culture around her. Her days quickly filled with meetings, presentations, and negotiations that often stretched well into the evening. In her hotel room at night, she would video call David, their conversations brief but comforting. He seemed distracted, mentioning a special project he was working on but providing few details. "It's something I think you'll love," he said mysteriously during their call on her 5th night away. "Just trust me on this one." Maya had smiled, too exhausted to press for more information. Trust wasn't something that came easily to her. She preferred concrete plans and transparent communication, but with David, she had learned to embrace a little mystery. The breakthrough came during her 2nd week in Singapore. After a particularly intensive session with the investors, Maya secured the funding her client desperately needed. The retail chain would survive, and hundreds of jobs would be saved. Her team back in Boston was ecstatic, her client tearfully grateful. "You've given our family legacy a future," the company's elderly founder told her, clasping her hands in his. "How can we ever repay you?" Maya should have felt triumphant. This was exactly the outcome she had worked so hard to achieve. Yet, as she stood on the balcony of her hotel room that night, watching the glittering Singapore skyline, she felt strangely hollow. She had solved the problem, saved the day, but something was missing. For the first time in years, Maya found herself questioning the path she had so carefully constructed. Was this all there was to life? Moving from one crisis to another, fixing other people's problems while ignoring the quiet emptiness that had begun to grow inside her. But that night, she made an impulsive decision. The remaining meetings could be handled virtually. There was nothing keeping her in Singapore for another week. She would surprise David by coming home early, perhaps even take a few days off to reconnect with him and address this strange melancholy that had settled over her. Within hours, Maya had rearranged her schedule, delegated tasks to her team, and booked a flight home. She didn't tell David partly because she wanted to surprise him, but also because she wasn't entirely sure how to explain this uncharacteristic deviation from her plan. The journey home was long and tiring. A delay in Tokyo meant she arrived in Boston in the early evening rather than morning, as she'd hoped. Rain poured down as her taxi navigated through rush-hour traffic, the city lights blurring through the wet windows like impressionist paintings. By the time the driver pulled up outside her brownstone, Maya was exhausted, jet-lagged, and beginning to question her spontaneous decision. What if David wasn't even home? What if her surprise disrupted something important in his schedule? Still, as she paid the driver and pulled her suitcase through the rain to her front door, she felt a flutter of excitement. This small act of spontaneity felt significant somehow, as if by breaking her own rigid patterns, she was taking a step toward something new. The house was unusually dark as she inserted her key into the lock. Perhaps David was still at the university. She pushed open the door, wheeled her suitcase into the foyer, and flipped on the light switch. That's when she heard its soft music coming from upstairs, the gentle melody of David's favorite jazz album. But he was home after all. Maya smiled, slipping off her wet coat and shoes, preparing to surprise him. She climbed the stairs quietly, following the music and a faint warm glow coming from the direction of their bedroom. As she approached, she noticed rose petals scattered on the hallway floor. Her heart warmed. Had David somehow found out she was coming home early? Had he prepared this romantic welcome for her? Maya pushed open the bedroom door, a greeting on her lips. And then she froze. Music cuts abruptly, the scene before her defied immediate comprehension. Their bedroom had been transformed. Dozens of candles created a warm, flickering glow throughout the space. The bed was covered not with their usual minimalist duvet, but with an unfamiliar colorful quilt patched together from what appeared to be various fabrics. The walls, normally adorned only with their carefully selected artwork, now displayed dozens of photographs, drawings, and handwritten notes. But it wasn't the transformed room that stopped Maya's breath in her throat. It was David, sitting cross-legged on the floor, surrounded by crafting supplies, scissors, glue, photo albums, and stacks of paper, completely absorbed in whatever he was creating. He hadn't noticed her yet, and for a suspended moment, Maya simply stared, trying to process what she was seeing. This wasn't their aesthetic. This explosion of sentimentality and color was the opposite of the clean, modern style they had agreed upon when decorating their home. "David?" she finally managed, her voice barely audible over the music. He jumped, scattering papers and nearly knocking over a nearby candle. When he turned and saw her, his expression shifted rapidly from shock to something that looked strangely like guilt. "Here, you're home." He scrambled to his feet, glancing around at the transformed room as if suddenly seeing it through her eyes. "You weren't supposed to be back until next week." Maya stepped further into the room, her confusion deepening as she examined the photographs on the walls. They weren't random images, but a carefully arranged timeline. She recognized herself as a child in some, David in others. There were photos from their first date, their wedding, vacations they'd taken together. Interspersed were concert tickets, dried flowers, handwritten notes they'd exchanged over the years, artifacts of their relationship she hadn't even realized he'd kept. "What is all this?" she asked, turning slowly to take in the full scope of the transformation. David ran a hand through his disheveled hair, a nervous gesture she knew well. "It was supposed to be a surprise, for our anniversary next month." He gestured to the quilt on the bed. "My mother taught me how to quilt when I was young. Each piece is from something meaningful. That's from the dress you wore on our first date. That's from my lucky shirt I was wearing when we met. That corner is from the tablecloth at the restaurant where I proposed." Maya moved closer to examine the quilt, touching it gently with trembling fingers. Each patch indeed seemed familiar, carrying memories she had filed away, but David had apparently treasured enough to preserve. "And the walls?" she asked, her voice unsteady. "Our story," he said simply. "I've been working on it since you left. I wanted to create a space where we could be surrounded by all the moments that brought us here." He paused, watching her carefully. "I know it's not your usual style. I was going to take it all down before you got back if you didn't like it." Maya's mind reeled. This was why he'd seemed distracted during their calls, why he'd mentioned a special project. While she'd been halfway around the world focused on saving a stranger's family business, David had been here, meticulously documenting and celebrating their own story. She moved to a section of the wall where several handwritten pages were displayed. With a start, she recognized her own handwriting letters she'd written to David during their early dating days. Beside them were his replies, full of the poetry and tenderness that had first drawn her to him. "You kept all of these?" she whispered. "Everyone," David confirmed, moving cautiously to stand beside her. "Maya, I know you prefer looking forward, planning the next step. It's one of the things I love about you. But I've always been the one looking back, treasuring what we've already built together." As the initial shock began to fade, Maya noticed something else on his desk, another project, half finished. It appeared to be a children's book, hand-illustrated with whimsical characters that resembled cartoon versions of herself and David. "And this?" she asked, picking it up. David's face flushed. "That's, something else I've been working on. A children's book about a planner and a dreamer who build a life together." He hesitated. "I thought maybe someday we could read it to our kids." Maya stared at the colorful pages, each illustrated with a care and talent she hadn't known David possessed. The characters embarked on adventures that mirrored their own relationship milestones, facing challenges together and growing stronger through each one. The room suddenly felt too warm, the scent of candles too intense. Maya sank onto the edge of the bed, the quilt of their memories beneath her fingers, but surrounded by physical evidence of a side of David and their relationship she had never fully acknowledged. "I don't understand," she said finally. "Why keep this hidden? Why turn our bedroom into this museum of us while I was gone?" David sat beside her, maintaining a careful distance. "Because I wasn't sure you'd appreciate it." You're always so focused on the next achievement, the next goal. Sometimes I worry that you're so busy planning our future that you don't take time to celebrate the life we've already created." He gestured around the room. "This was my way of showing you what I see when I look at our relationship, not a project to be managed, but a story to be treasured." Maya felt tears threatening and blinked them back. This wasn't at all what she had expected to find upon her early return. She had been prepared for an empty house, for David grading papers at his desk, maybe even for him having friends over for one of his impromptu dinner parties. But this raw, unfiltered glimpse into how differently they viewed their shared life. This was more intimate and unsettling than if she'd caught him in any kind of compromising situation. Because the truth staring back at her from every wall, every memento, every stitch in that handmade quilt was simple and devastating. But David had been paying attention to details of their life together that she had been too busy to notice. He had been cherishing what they had, while she had been planning what they would become. And now she had to decide how to respond to this unexpected revelation about the man she thought she knew completely and the life she suddenly realized she had been only partially living. Soft, contemplative music begins. Maya's first instinct was to retreat, to mumble something about jet lag and the need for a shower, to escape this room that suddenly felt like an accusation of all the ways she had failed to be present in her own life. But as she started to rise from the bed, her hand brushed against the quilt, but she found herself tracing the outline of a fabric patch she recognized from the scarf she'd worn on their third date, the one where they'd been caught in an unexpected snowstorm, and had taken shelter in a tiny bookshop, spending hours discovering their shared love of obscure Russian literature. She remembered that day perfectly, how David's glasses had fogged up when they'd entered the warm shop, how he'd quoted Chekhov as they browsed the shelves, how she'd felt, but for perhaps the first time in her hyper-planned life, that some things were worth going off schedule for. "You remember this?" she asked softly, pointing to the scarf patch. David's face relaxed slightly. "Petrov's books on Commonwealth Avenue. But you had hot chocolate with cinnamon, and you got that little whipped cream mustache that you didn't know about for like 10 minutes. A reluctant smile tugged at Maya's lips. "I thought you were staring at me because you found me fascinating." "Oh, I did," David assured her, his own smile emerging. The whipped cream mustache was just a bonus. The tension eased fractionally, but the fundamental question remained. Maya gestured around the room, struggling to articulate her conflicted feelings. "All of this, it's beautiful, David. It really is. But it's also not you," he finished quietly. "I know. That's why I was going to put everything back before you returned. I just wanted to create it once, to see our whole story laid out, to remind myself of how lucky I am." His words hit Maya with unexpected force. Not you. Was that true? Was she really so detached from sentimentality, so focused on efficiency that this expression of love and memory felt foreign to her? And if so, what did that say about her? "I need some air," she said abruptly, standing up. "I'm going to take a walk." "Maya, it's pouring outside," David protested, rising to follow her. "I need to think," she insisted. "Just give me some space to process this." Without waiting for his response, Maya fled downstairs, grabbing her still damp coat and stepping back out into the rain. She walked aimlessly through their neighborhood, barely noticing the water soaking through her clothes, her mind racing. Why did she feel so shaken? Why should finding her husband creating a loving tribute to their relationship feel like discovering a betrayal? The answer, when it came to her, was uncomfortable, because it forced her to confront the possibility that they wanted fundamentally different things from life. David clearly yearned for a home filled with memories, personal touches, perhaps even children to share their story with. He valued the past, the emotional landmarks they had created together. While what did she value? Career success, certainly. Financial security. A well-ordered life where surprises were minimized and outcomes could be predicted. But were those things enough to build a fulfilling life? And more importantly, were they enough to sustain the kind of deep connection that David clearly desired? Maya found herself at a small neighborhood park, empty now in the rain. She sat on a wet bench, no longer caring about the state of her clothes, and forced herself to confront questions she had been too busy to ask for years. Did she love David? Unquestionably. But was she happy in their marriage? She had always thought so, but now she wondered if what she had been calling happiness was really just satisfaction with a well-executed plan. Had she been treating their relationship like another project to manage rather than a living, growing thing to nurture? The rain eventually eased to a drizzle, and Maya realized she had been sitting in the park for over an hour. She was soaked, chilled, and no closer to knowing how to respond to the situation waiting for her at home. But she couldn't stay away forever. Reluctantly, she rose and began the walk back to their brownstone. As she approached their home, Maya noticed that the lights were on in every room, as if David had turned them all on while looking for her. Through the front window, she could see him pacing in the living room, phone pressed to his ear. He was worried about her. Maya paused on the sidewalk, studying the home she had purchased and decorated with such care. It was beautiful, tasteful, and entirely impersonal, a showpiece rather than a sanctuary. For the first time, she tried to see it through David's eyes. Did he feel at home there? Or had he created their bedroom sanctuary because he needed a space that reflected who they really were rather than who she thought they should appear to be? With a deep breath, Maya walked up the steps and opened the front door. David was there immediately, relief washing over his features. Thank God. I was about to call the police. You're soaking wet, let me get you a towel. He rushed off and returned with their fluffiest towel, wrapping it around her shoulders before she could protest. The simple act of care brought tears to Maya's eyes, her voice steadier than she felt. I just needed to think. Now that he had assured himself of her safety. And did you? Think, I mean? The man who had just revealed a depth of feeling and thoughtfulness she hadn't known he possessed, and recognized that they had reached a pivotal moment. What she said next would determine the course of their marriage and, perhaps more importantly, the kind of person she chose to become. I think, Maya said carefully, that I need to see everything again. With an open mind this time. But you're sure? You're not too tired from your trip? Smile. But this feels more important than sleep right now. Transformed bedroom. This time, instead of the initial shock, Maya forced herself to really look at what David had created. She moved slowly around the room, studying each photograph, reading the handwritten notes, asking questions about mentors she didn't immediately recognize. Pointing to a small, smooth stone mounted in a simple frame. Weekend away together, David explained. You were on a conference call, some client emergency you had to handle, and I was collecting interesting rocks. When you finished your call, you apologized for working during our getaway, and I gave you this stone. Do you remember what I said? Memory. You said that some things are shaped to perfection by time and patience, not by force or control. Her eyes opened, finding his. You were talking about more than just the stone, weren't you? I tell you, even then, that I didn't need you to be perfect or completely available every moment. That our relationship could weather interruptions and challenges as long as we returned to each other. To examine the quilt more closely. Each patch did indeed tell a story. There was fabric from the tablecloth at their wedding, from the curtains in their first apartment, even a piece of the hideous tie David had worn to his interview at the university. Wonder in her voice. Planning this for years. Gently. Just preserving possibilities. Holding space for the meaning in our everyday moments. But wasn't that what she had failed to do? In her determination to plan the perfect future, she had neglected to honor the present or cherish the past. I think I owe you an apology. For treating our relationship like another project to be managed rather than this. She gestured to the room around them. This beautiful story we're creating together. His eyes. Does that mean you like it? I said honestly. And I want to understand more. I want to know this side of you that I've somehow missed all these years. David hesitated. But his voice had grown serious. Something I've been trying to tell you for months, but it never seemed like the right time. What is it? What is it? Not happy at the university anymore. I've been offered a position at a small private school in Vermont, teaching creative writing to high school students. It's less prestige, less money, but it's what I want to do. What I think I need to do. Her feet. Vermont. But your tenure-track position, our life here, my job. That's why I haven't given them an answer yet. Because accepting would mean asking you to give up so much of what you've worked for, to completely reimagine your own career path. Struggling to process this second shock of the evening. He paused. Long enough to sell the house if we decided to move, or long enough for me to find an apartment there if you needed to stay in Boston. Could potentially separate them. The carefully constructed life Maya had planned was threatening to unravel completely. Demanded, a flash of anger cutting through her confusion. David admitted, afraid you'd shut down the idea immediately. Afraid you'd see it as a betrayal of our plan rather than an evolution of it. He gestured around the room. All of this was partly my way of reminding myself of what we have, or of what I'd be risking if I pursued this change. Trying to absorb this new information. David wanted to leave Boston, leave his prestigious university position, possibly even leave her if she couldn't or wouldn't adapt to this dramatic shift in their life plan. Slowly, but it's a goodbye. Her. It's a question. It's me asking if our story together is stronger than our individual plans. It's me hoping that what we've built is flexible enough to bend without breaking. Of their history together, at the love and care evident in every detail, and felt the foundations of her carefully ordered world continuing to shift. For years she had been the architect of their life together, designing their future based on her vision of success. Now David was asking her to consider a completely different blueprint, one where his fulfillment mattered as much as her ambition, but where their story might unfold in an entirely unexpected setting. She said finally, "This is a lot to process." Understanding too. I know. I didn't expect to have this conversation today. I was going to wait until after your project was complete, after you'd had time to rest. What I do know is that I don't want to make this decision the way I've made others in my life, with spreadsheets and pro-con lists and 5-year projections. I want to make it with my heart as well as my head. She squeezed his hands, and I want us to make it together. Perhaps, or hope. Together, he echoed. That's all I really wanted to hear. Optimistic tone. The next morning, Maya woke to sunlight streaming through their bedroom windows. For a moment, she was disoriented by the transformed space, the walls covered with their shared history, the unfamiliar quilt warm across her body. Then she remembered everything: her early return, David's revelation, the decision looming before them. But she could hear movement downstairs, the familiar sounds of coffee brewing and music playing softly. She rose, wrapping herself in her robe, and made her way to the kitchen. Cakes her favorite weekend breakfast that she rarely had time for anymore. He looked up when she entered, his expression careful, as if unsure what version of his wife he would be facing this morning. "Thought you might be hungry after your long trip." "Thank you. That's thoughtful." The easy rhythm of their shared life temporarily disrupted by the truths they had confronted the night before. Maya took her coffee to the breakfast nook, watching David as he arranged pancakes on a plate for her. This man, who could have used her absence to prepare for a potential separation, had instead created a shrine to their love. What did that say about him? About them? Best as David joined her with his own plate. "I kept thinking about everything we talked about Vermont. Pamol. Though said slowly. "When you told me about the job offer, my first thought wasn't about my career or even about moving. It was fear that you'd been unhappy in our life together all this time without my noticing." She held up a hand. "This is important." She took a deep breath. "I've always believed that my ability to plan, to control outcomes, was my strength. That it was how I showed my love for the people in my life by creating security and success. But last night made me realize that I've been so focused on building our future that I haven't been fully present in our present. You've been collecting moments, preserving memories, appreciating what we have while I've been obsessing over what we might someday achieve. And the thing is, David, I don't know how to be any different. Planning and control are embedded in who I am. And I've never wanted you to be different. Your drive, your focus, they're part of why I love you. I just want to be sure there's room in our life for both our needs, both our dreams." "That's just it. I'm not sure I even know what my dreams are anymore, beyond the next promotion, the next achievement. When was the last time I did something simply because it brought me joy? When did I last make a decision that wasn't calculated to advance some 5-year plan? When we were house hunting, you fell in love with this place, even though it was outside our budget and needed renovations. You made that decision with your heart." How she had indeed felt an immediate connection to this house, despite all the practical reasons against buying it. "You're right, and I don't regret it for a moment." She paused. "Maybe that's a sign that my heart makes better decisions than my spreadsheet sometimes." "Are you saying what I think you're saying?" Replied. "I want to see this school, meet the people, understand why this opportunity calls to you so strongly. I can't promise anything beyond that, but I can promise to approach it with an open heart instead of a closed mind." "That's more than fair. And Maya, whatever we decide, I want you to know that the room upstairs isn't meant to pressure you or make you feel bad about who you are. It's a celebration of who we are together, the planner and the dreamer, finding our way forward by valuing both perspectives." A tightness she hadn't even realized she'd been carrying. "When could we go? To Vermont, I mean." "Unless that's too soon after your trip." Why this weekend wouldn't work, the report she needed to finish, the laundry that had piled up during her absence, the social obligations they had penciled into their calendar months ago. Instead, she found herself saying, "This weekend sounds perfect." It was worth the momentary anxiety she felt at rearranging her schedules so impulsively. Perhaps this was what he had been trying to show her all along, that sometimes the most valuable moments come from surrendering control rather than maintaining it. The drive to Vermont that weekend was quiet, but both Maya and David lost in their own thoughts as the urban landscape of Boston gave way to the rolling hills and small towns of rural New England. Spring was just beginning to touch the countryside, delicate green buds appearing on trees, occasional bursts of early wildflowers dotting the roadside. Seeing him with new eyes after the revelations of the past few days. He hummed along softly to the radio, occasionally pointing out interesting sights, along the way a red-tailed hawk circling above a field. A particularly beautiful farmhouse set against the backdrop of mountains, a quirky roadside attraction advertising the world's largest ball of twine. In her rush to reach a destination, to accomplish a goal. How many other beautiful moments had she missed while her mind was racing ahead to the next task, the next achievement? Just as the afternoon sun was casting a golden glow over the historic buildings of its main street, the private school where David had been offered a position sat on a gentle hill overlooking the town, a collection of ivy-covered brick buildings surrounded by ancient maple trees and expansive playing fields. Parked, like something from a movie about idyllic small-town life. Her positive first impression. Wait until you meet the people. That's what really sold me on this place. Greeted them warmly despite it being the weekend. A woman in her 60s with silver hair and keen eyes, she gave them a tour of the campus.